Young people often, when I talk to them, one of the things that vexes them the most is that they are concerned that when they speak, and they particularly speak about their faith or Christian truth, that people will react badly. And they want to know, how can I say it in such a way that nobody will react badly? I have to say to them, well, it is a feature, not a bug in the Christian life, that some people will react badly to you. Jesus said, so they persecuted the prophets who were before you, didn't he? That's what he said. I mean, the prophets didn't have a problem with being nice. They had a problem with telling the truth. And people got mad at them. And, the joke I've often told, and some of you might have heard of it, is that, I don't think when you get to heaven, you're going to be able to say to Isaiah, you wouldn't have been sawn in half in that hollow log if you'd just been a bit nicer about it. That wasn't Isaiah's problem. Sometimes the truth, for righteousness' sake, said Jesus, the truth itself can have this effect. But when you feel that pushback, when you feel that challenge, here's the message of Jesus that I want to leave us with. He says, keep going. And he says, keep going by using two metaphors for your job in the world. One is that you've got to continue to be salt. One is that you've got to continue to be light. When it comes to this salt thing, the point is, stay tasty, which sounds weird. But salt loses its taste when the environment that it's been sitting in seeps into it, the water, the moisture gets in. What he's saying is, don't compromise in your environment. Don't change for the world around you. And here is something that we've failed to believe, which is that it is our difference that will make the difference. It is not our compromise, our accommodation, and our sameness. It is the difference and the distinctive that matters. And that's the point of the salt metaphor. Stay tasty, stay uncompromised in a world that is putrefying, effectively. But it starts, and in the context when Jesus says this in Luke, it's right in the middle of him saying, if your right eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. Now, he's not saying literally do those things. It's hyperbole, so please don't. But what he is saying is take sin seriously. And it begins here, not out here. And all of us, I really believe that if we're ever going to see a revival in the church in this country, it's going to start with the repentance of God's people. And it starts very seriously with taking, who was it, the famous preacher who said, be killing sin or it'll be killing you. Some of us think confession is a Catholic thing. And the Catholics in the room will be very pleased to hear me say that. But you might have to confess that because that's self-righteousness. But confession should be a daily discipline because we should take sin seriously. And when we read the Bible, we should do it with meekness and humility, as James says in chapter 1, to receive its instruction and change, and actually make that a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly discipline. One thing Dad used to say to me, speaking of tips for teens, he said, you should look back 12 months ago, and you should say, as a Christian, I have grown. And if you can't say that, then you're not on a good path. You need to change. Salt begins there. Even secret sins, one of the big deceptions that people have is they think that their secret sins won't catch up with them. It's interesting when you read the story of Solomon. My goodness, wasn't he a guy who started with such promise? Oh, he was wise. He prayed for wisdom, how that pleased God, and he was put in such a wonderful position. He was such a good man. He did so many amazing things. But it's interesting, one negative thing is said about Solomon. He loved foreign women. What happened? Well, we know. It was his downfall. It was the thing that took him away from God. Secret sins will get you. We need to take this seriously, that God might use us as salt in a world that is going bad. And that means that when you go into university and your workplace, you won't compromise under peer pressure. It means that, when you do have entertainment options of an evening, you'll be a little bit careful about that because that'll change you and it'll change the way you think. A lot of people spend their lives wallowing around in filth in their entertainment. It's not good. It's not doing you any good. And also, you'll see those worldly ideals like self-love and all this kind of stuff that's going, and you'll know it's wrong. And you won't go for it. And you'll stay salty. And the final thing Jesus says is, you're not just salt, but you're light. What's the point of light? For salt, it was no compromise. For light, it is visibility. The light's not hidden under the basket, remember, but it is visible. It is seen by people. I think we need to find ways to be visible. That really is an important thing in the Christian life, and many people do it to great effect. But, just little things, like my cufflinks are crosses, right? I want to get a Christian fish lapel pin. Things, or maybe drop something into a conversation. Someone might say, beautiful day today. Just say, well, isn't God good? Just see what happens. You never know. They might have heard 3 other comments that day, and it might be getting to them. And it might just do something in the conscience. I mean, you hear funny stories like that. But also, it might open a conversation, it might not. Don't worry if it doesn't. Move on. Find ways to be heard and to be seen and to be visible. And here's the other thing, and I say this to young people as well. Start somewhere. Start somewhere. I know we all go through a time when we're anxious and nervous and we don't want to talk about it, but here's the thing. One day, an opportunity will come, and pray for it. And when it comes, take it, because it will come if you pray for it, I promise you. Been there, done that a lot of times. It comes. Sometimes quite challenging. And you might open your mouth and say something. And you might sound like the biggest fool in the world. And the whole room might say, you're the biggest fool in the world. And you might go, my goodness, I'm the biggest fool in the world. And you might go home, and you might not be able to get it out of your head, and you might have done the stupidest thing. But here's the thing, next time you won't be so foolish, because you'll think about it. And you're going, how could I have done that a little bit better? And the next time, and in 5 years' time, you won't know yourself. You'll be a genius. And everybody will say, wow, look, you might even go on Q&A. You never know. People will say, this person knows how to speak. Well, you've got to start somewhere. People aren't born with this, I wasn't born with this. I was an awkward, nervous teenager, the same as the next guy. I was terrified of people. But you start somewhere. So that old adage, speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. Oh, how true that is. Also, if you're saying, well, I never get opportunities, I try and nothing ever comes, no one ever asks me. There's a brilliant talk you should all watch by Professor John Lennox. Those of you who know him, professor at Oxford University, so a Christian in the most hostile environment. And there's one called The Winsome Apologist. And I love his joke at the start. He says, I assume by winsome you didn't mean win some, lose some. But he gets up there and he talks about the winsome apologist. And basically he talks about being a witness in the world at large and finding, some of the things I've mentioned tonight are the sorts of things he talks about. But he says he got really vexed as a young man. And someone said, be ready always to give an answer for the hope that is in you. Quotes from Peter. He says, but no one ever asks me. How can I give an answer? And the bloke said, well, did you ask them? He said, well, no, I hadn't thought of that. And so anyway, he wasn't that young, he was already a mathematician, but he got on the train a few days later and he was going along on the train and he was sitting next to a bloke and he was reading a book which was very high-level mathematics. And he looked at this guy, he said, are you a mathematician? The guy said, yes, I am. I said, oh, me too. He goes, oh, good. And he went back to reading. And so John reaches into his bag and he pulls out a New Testament. And he opens it and starts reading. And he said the bloke next to him looked and looked away. Then looked, and he said he just couldn't stop looking. And eventually he said, excuse me. He said, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I thought you said you're a mathematician. I said, I am. And he went back to reading. And the guy says to him, but he goes, that's a New Testament. He says, yes, it is, and goes back to reading. And he said, and this bloke was visibly agitated. And he turned to him and he said, now you tell me, he said, have you got any hope? And he said the fellow went white and started to shake. And he said, well, I guess we all muddle through. And he said, no, I want to know, have you got any hope? You didn't answer my question. And the guy then said, no, I haven't got any hope at all. And then he had a conversation with him and he gave him a New Testament. And he said, as he got to his station, he said a woman sitting behind him shoved her head between the two of them and said, well, I believe in Mother Earth. And he looked at her, and just as he was thinking, oh no, this is going to undo all my good work, she said, can I have one of those little books too? And so he leaned into his bag where he had a second one. He said his wife had packed two, and he gave it to her. And he says, you just never know what opportunities you can create. And you may muck up one, you may muck up two, but we've got to get good at doing a few of these things. I'll tell you one way you can do it is if you're an ACL volunteer. Great segue, right? There's a great opportunity for you to build your courage and your boldness to go out and do a few things in the public eye. Now, what's the result of all this? Jesus said what we've been saying all night. He says, people will see your good works and they will give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Do 12 men turned the world upside down because they knew what they were about. They'd seen the risen Lord. All the people who say, this Christianity stuff is garbage, tell me why 12 men died for it. You don't die for a lie and live a life of hardship for a lie. As Charles Colson said, the 12 most powerful men in the world couldn't keep Watergate a secret for 1 week. They split on each other real fast. These men went and they lived the hardest lives and they died for their testimony of the risen Christ. And they turned the world upside down. Do you know in this room there's about 850 people? There was 950, but there's a few missing seats. I don't know where those people have gone. Never miss church, guys. This is, anyway. There's about 850 people. And that's just here in Cairns. What a difference it can make when God's people are lights and when God's people are salt. And never believe that God is not at work in the world. Politics can go to custard, and it might go to custard. But don't forget, and I'll talk to you right at the end about a couple of these things, don't forget that there's a ground game going on. There's hearts and there's minds that Jesus is reaching and that Jesus is changing. And never forget that that is our end game. We're not just there to change people's minds on public policy. We're always going to be there finally and ultimately to point them to Jesus Christ. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Martin Niles, and that was the truth of it. Thank you.